At my baby shower, my sister-in-law said, "You're having a girl? What a waste of a pregnancy and a mother." Everyone laughed, including my husband, who added, "At least now we know not to get our hopes up for anything worthwhile from this kid." That night I disappeared without a word, packing everything while they celebrated downstairs. The next morning, I woke up to 93 missed calls. My name is Sheila, and this is the story of how one cruel comment at what should have been the happiest day of my pregnancy became the catalyst for the most satisfying revenge I've ever executed. The baby shower had been planned for months. My sister-in-law Claire had insisted on hosting it at her pristine suburban home, complete with her perfectly manicured lawn and color-coordinated decorations. I should have known something was off when she kept asking pointed questions about whether we knew the gender yet, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. My husband Logan had brushed off my concerns, telling me I was being overly sensitive due to pregnancy hormones. The day arrived with picture-perfect weather, and I felt genuinely excited as I walked into Claire's living room, decorated in soft pastels with welcome baby banners hanging from every surface. About 30 people had gathered, family members, friends from work, neighbors, and Logan's entire extended family. The atmosphere felt warm and celebratory as I opened gift after gift of tiny clothes, blankets, and baby essentials. Everything was going beautifully until we reached the moment everyone had been waiting for, the gender reveal. Logan had prepared a small speech about how excited we were to discover whether we were having a boy or girl. I stood there, one hand resting on my 6-month bump, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for all the love surrounding us. Claire handed me an envelope containing the ultrasound results that would reveal our baby's gender. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and pulled out the pink card inside. "It's a girl," I announced, tears of joy streaming down my face. I looked around the room, expecting to see matching smiles and hear congratulations, but instead, I was met with an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. That's when Claire's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "You're having a girl? What a waste of a pregnancy and a mother." The words hit me like a physical blow, but what happened next was even worse. Instead of the shocked gasps and immediate corrections I expected, the room erupted in laughter. Not nervous, uncomfortable laughter, but genuine amusement, as if she'd just delivered the punchline to a hilarious joke. My husband, the man who had promised to love and protect both me and our unborn child, didn't come to my defense. Instead, he joined in with his own devastating comment, "At least now we know not to get our hopes up for anything worthwhile from this kid." The laughter grew louder, and I felt my world crumbling around me as person after person nodded in agreement or added their own disparaging remarks about having daughters. I stood there, completely frozen, as the conversation continued around me as if I weren't even present. Claire's friends began sharing stories about how disappointed they'd been when they had daughters instead of sons. My mother-in-law, Bella, chimed in with comments about how girls were more expensive to raise and less likely to carry on the family name. Even my own sister Ophelia, who I'd always counted on for support, remained silent, looking down at her hands rather than meeting my eyes. The party continued for another 2 hours, but I felt like I was watching it all happen from outside my body. People continued opening gifts, eating cake, and making conversation, but every word felt like it was being spoken through thick glass. I mechanically thanked people for their gifts and smiled when spoken to, but inside, I was planning my escape. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I helped Claire clean up, my movements automatic and emotionless. Logan was in the backyard with his brothers and cousins, their voices growing louder as they consumed more drinks and continued their celebration. I could hear them through the open windows, still making jokes about our daughter and speculating about what a disappointment she'd turn out to be. Once the last guest had departed and the dishes were washed, I told Claire I was going home to rest. She barely looked up from organizing leftover decorations as she dismissed me with a casual wave. Logan announced he was staying to continue the family gathering, which had apparently evolved into an impromptu reunion now that the baby stuff was over. I drove home in complete silence, my mind crystal clear for the first time in hours. As I pulled into our driveway, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and for the first time that day, I felt truly in control of the situation. The house felt eerily quiet as I walked through the front door. I stood in our living room for a moment, looking around at the life Logan and I had built together over the past 4 years. The family photos on the mantel, the furniture we'd chosen together, the little touches that made this place feel like home, it all suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I went upstairs to our bedroom and pulled out the largest suitcases I could find. With methodical precision, I began packing my most essential belongings. Clothes, important documents, jewelry, family heirlooms that had been passed down from my grandmother, everything that was truly mine and irreplaceable. I emptied my half of our joint savings account using the mobile banking app, transferring the funds to my personal account that I'd maintained since before our marriage. As I packed, I could hear Logan's voice drifting up from Claire's backyard next door, still laughing and carrying on with his family. The sound that had once brought me comfort now made my stomach turn. I realized that in 4 years of marriage, I'd never heard him defend me with the same passion he showed when discussing sports or work. I'd been so focused on being the perfect wife that I'd completely overlooked how little he actually valued me. By midnight, I had everything I needed loaded into my car. I left my wedding ring on the dresser along with a note that simply read, "I've gone somewhere I'll be appreciated. Don't follow me." I didn't explain where I was going or when I'd be back because honestly, I didn't know the answers to those questions myself. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas and restroom breaks, until I reached my college roommate Persephone's house in the city 4 hours away. I called her during one of my stops, and despite the late hour, she immediately invited me to stay as long as I needed. Persephone had always been fiercely independent and had never particularly liked Logan, though she'd been too polite to say so directly. When I arrived at her doorstep at dawn, exhausted and emotionally drained, she took one look at me and immediately pulled me into a tight hug. "Whatever happened, we'll figure it out together," she said without asking any questions. That simple statement of unconditional support made me cry harder than I had all night. I slept for nearly 12 hours, and when I finally woke up, my phone showed 93 missed calls and over 200 text messages. Logan had apparently returned home to find me gone and had been frantically trying to reach me ever since. The messages ranged from confused to angry to desperate, but notably, none of them included an apology for what had happened at the baby shower. Persephone made us coffee while I scrolled through the messages, and I filled her in on the events that had led me to her doorstep. Her expression grew darker with each detail I shared, and by the time I finished, she was practically vibrating with anger on my behalf. "You're not going back to him," she declared firmly. "At least not until he proves he deserves you, which honestly might be never." I felt a tremendous sense of relief at having someone validate my feelings instead of telling me I was overreacting or being too sensitive. Over the next few days, I ignored all calls and messages from Logan and his family while I tried to figure out my next steps. Persephone had a successful career in marketing and lived in a spacious apartment with a guest room that she insisted I could use indefinitely. She also introduced me to her lawyer friend, Araminta, who specialized in family law and was willing to consult with me about my options. Meanwhile, Logan's attempts to contact me were becoming increasingly frantic. He'd apparently reached out to every mutual friend and family member we had, trying to track me down. My sister Ophelia called to tell me that he'd shown up at her house demanding to know where I was. When she claimed not to know, he'd accused her of lying and created such a scene that her neighbors had threatened to call the police. After a week of radio silence, I finally decided to call him back. I waited until I felt completely calm and emotionally prepared for the conversation, knowing that this call would set the tone for everything that followed. "Sheila. Thank goodness, I've been worried sick about you." Logan's voice sounded genuinely relieved, but I could also detect an underlying note of irritation. "Where are you? I'll come get you right now." "I'm somewhere safe," I replied evenly. "And I'm not ready to tell you where that is yet." "What do you mean you're not ready? You're my wife. You can't just disappear without a word, especially when you're pregnant. This is completely irresponsible behavior." His immediate shift to accusation and blame confirmed that I'd made the right decision in leaving. "Logan, do you remember what happened at the baby shower?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Look, I know Claire was a little harsh, but you know how she gets when she's had a few drinks. You're taking this whole thing way too seriously." "A little harsh?" I repeated, my voice carefully controlled. "She called our daughter worthless, and you agreed with her. In front of 30 people. I didn't call her worthless. I was just going along with the joke. You know I don't really feel that way." "Do I know that, Logan?" "Because your immediate instinct was to join in mocking our child rather than defending her. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Logan alternating between apologies, excuses, and demands that I come home immediately. He promised that things would be different, that he'd talk to Claire about her behavior, that he'd make it up to me somehow. But notably, he never acknowledged the depth of the hurt he'd caused or took full responsibility for his actions. When I finally hung up, I felt more convinced than ever that I needed to stay away until he truly understood the gravity of the situation. I also realized that I needed to start planning for the possibility that our marriage might not survive this betrayal. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into preparing for my new reality. I found a job with a marketing firm in the city, leveraging my previous experience and some connections Persephone had helped me make. The work was challenging and engaging, providing a welcome distraction from the drama back home. I also found an obstetrician who could take over my prenatal care and began attending a support group for expectant mothers. Meanwhile, the situation back home was apparently escalating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Through mutual friends, I learned that Logan had become increasingly erratic in his behavior. He'd been calling in sick to work frequently, showing up at random people's houses looking for me, and generally making everyone uncomfortable with his obsessive need to track me down. Claire, perhaps realizing that her comment had triggered this entire crisis, had been trying to convince everyone that I was having some sort of mental breakdown brought on by pregnancy hormones. She'd been telling people that I'd always been unstable and that Logan was better off without me. This information came to me through my sister Ophelia, who had finally found the courage to speak up in my defense after witnessing Claire's campaign to discredit me. The turning point came when I received a call from my former neighbor, Isadora, who lived across the street from Logan and me. She was calling to warn me that Logan had been asking people to spy on me if they heard from me, offering money for information about my whereabouts. More disturbing, she'd overheard him on a phone call with someone discussing hiring a private investigator to track me down. "Sheila, I don't know what happened between you two, but this behavior isn't normal," Isadora said, her voice filled with concern. "He's scaring people, and honestly, if I were you, I'd be scared too." That conversation prompted me to have a serious discussion with Araminta about obtaining a restraining order. While Logan hadn't made any direct threats, his escalating behavior and attempts to use others to track me down were concerning. Araminta advised me to document everything and be prepared to take legal action if his behavior continued to escalate. As my due date approached, I found myself feeling stronger and more confident than I had in years. The support system I'd built in my new city was incredible. Persephone had become like a sister to me, my coworkers had embraced me as part of their team, and I'd made genuine friendships with other women in my support group. For the first time, I was experiencing what it felt like to be truly valued and appreciated for who I was. I also discovered that I was capable of far more than I'd ever given myself credit for. Living independently, managing my own finances, and preparing for single motherhood had revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. The woman who had stood frozen at that baby shower, absorbing insults without defending herself, felt like a completely different person. 3 weeks before my due date, I received an unexpected call from Bella, my mother-in-law. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sheila, I need to speak with you," she said without preamble. "Logan doesn't know I'm calling." "What can I do for you, Bella?" "I owe you an apology. A big one." Her voice sounded strained, almost tearful. "I've been watching my son fall apart over the past few months, and I finally realized that we drove you away with our terrible behavior." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. That day at the baby shower, I was ashamed of myself the moment the words left my mouth, but I was too cowardly to speak up. "I let my daughter say horrible things about your baby, and then I watched my son join in, and I said nothing. I've raised my children to believe that boys are more valuable than girls, and seeing the consequences of that has made me realize how wrong I've been." She went on to explain that Logan's erratic behavior had been getting worse, and that she'd finally confronted him about what had really happened at the baby shower. When he tried to minimize the incident, she'd spoken to other guests who confirmed that the treatment I'd received had been completely inappropriate. "Sheila, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that your daughter is wanted and loved, at least by me. I've been knitting blankets for her and setting up a nursery in my house, hoping that someday you'll give us a chance to be better." The conversation was emotional and difficult, but it gave me hope that at least some members of Logan's family were capable of growth and change. Bella didn't ask me to come home or reconcile with her son, but she did ask if she could be part of her granddaughter's life when I was ready. I gave birth to my daughter, Clara, on a beautiful spring morning with Persephone by my side as my labor coach. She was perfect in every way, healthy, beautiful, and absolutely precious. As I held her for the first time, I felt overwhelmed with love and protectiveness. I also felt a deep sense of gratitude that she would grow up knowing her worth from day one, surrounded by people who celebrated her existence rather than seeing her as a disappointment. I sent a single photo to Logan with the message, "Clara Rose, born at 6:47 a.m., 7 pounds 3 ounces, perfectly healthy." I didn't include any other information or respond to his flood of messages begging to see her. The next few months passed in a blur of new motherhood, work, and gradual healing. I'd found an excellent daycare near my office, and Clara was thriving. My life had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and fulfilling. I'd also started attending therapy to work through the trauma of that baby shower and the years of marriage where I'd accepted less than I deserved. Meanwhile, reports from home suggested that Logan was finally beginning to understand the gravity of his actions. According to Ophelia, He'd started attending therapy as well and had even had a confrontation with Claire about her behavior. Apparently, he demanded that she apologize to me and threatened to cut contact with her if she continued to disparage me or Clara. This information was interesting, but I wasn't ready to forgive him just because he was finally doing what he should have done months ago. The damage to our relationship had been severe, and I needed to see sustained change over a long period before I'd consider reconciliation. When Clara was 6 months old, I finally agreed to meet with Logan in person. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our respective cities, with the understanding that this was just a conversation, not a reunion. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loose on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. When he saw Clara for the first time, he broke down crying, and I had to admit that his emotions seemed genuine. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch her tiny hand. "She's absolutely perfect." "Yes, she is," I replied firmly. "Despite being worthless and a waste of a pregnancy." He flinched at having his words quoted back to him. "Sheila, I know I can never take back what I said that day. I know I failed you and failed her in the worst possible way. I've been in therapy for months trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would say such horrible things about his own child." We talked for 2 hours, with him explaining the work he'd been doing in therapy and the changes he'd been making in his life. He'd cut contact with several family members who refused to acknowledge their behavior at the baby shower. He'd also been attending parenting classes and reading books about raising confident daughters, trying to educate himself about the damage that gendered expectations could cause. Most importantly, he'd finally stood up to his family in a way he'd never done before. When Claire had tried to justify her comments by saying she was just being honest about the challenges of raising girls, he told her that she was no longer welcome in his life until she could treat his wife and daughter with respect. The conversation was productive, but I made it clear that I wasn't ready to make any decisions about our future. I needed to see sustained change over time, not just promises and good intentions. I also needed to feel confident that he would protect Clara from any future family drama, even if it meant choosing her over his extended family. Over the following year, Logan proved his commitment to change through consistent action. He drove to our city twice a month to spend time with Clara, always respectful of my boundaries and never pressuring me for more than I was willing to give. He sent thoughtful gifts for both of us, not expensive things designed to win us back, but meaningful items that showed he'd been paying attention to our needs and interests. He also kept me informed about the ongoing situation with his family. Several members had offered genuine apologies and had been working to earn their way back into our lives. Others, including Claire, had remained defiant and had been permanently cut from his social circle. He'd even changed family lawyers and financial advisors to avoid continued contact with relatives who refused to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Most impressively, he'd begun volunteering with an organization that mentored young girls in STEM fields, working to combat exactly the kind of gender-based prejudice that had led to our separation. When I learned about this from a mutual friend rather than from him directly, I was struck by the fact that he was doing this work for its own sake, not as a way to impress me. The real test came when Clara turned 1 and we decided to have a small birthday party. I agreed to let Logan help plan it, but I insisted that only people who had consistently shown respect for both of us would be invited. This meant excluding several family members who had been at the original baby shower, including Claire. The party was everything the baby shower should have been, full of love, joy, and celebration of our daughter. Bella was there, having earned her way back into our lives through months of consistent respect and support. Ophelia came, bringing a heartfelt apology for her silence during the baby shower. Several of Logan's cousins attended, having individually reached out to me over the past year to apologize for their behavior and express their excitement about being part of Clara's life. Most importantly, Logan spent the entire party focused on making sure Clara felt celebrated and loved. He gave a speech about how proud he was to be her father and how excited he was to watch her grow into the amazing person he knew she would become. The contrast with his behavior at the baby shower was so stark that several guests commented on the positive changes they'd witnessed in him. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Logan asked if he could speak with me privately. We stepped out onto the back porch while Persephone watched Clara, and he pulled a small box from his pocket. "This isn't what you think," he said quickly, seeing my expression. "It's not an engagement ring or a wedding ring. It's something else entirely." Inside the box was a beautiful necklace with a pendant that had been engraved with Clara's name and birth date. "I wanted to give you something that would remind you every day that you're the mother of the most wonderful little girl in the world," he explained. "I know I can't undo the damage I caused with my words that day, but I want to spend the rest of my life making sure both of you know how precious and valuable you are." The gesture was thoughtful and meaningful, But what impressed me most was that he didn't use it as an opportunity to pressure me about reconciliation. He simply wanted to honor my role as Clara's mother and acknowledge the strength I'd shown in protecting her from an environment where she wasn't valued. That night, after everyone had gone home and Clara was asleep, I found myself really considering the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. The man who had failed me so completely at the baby shower had done the hard work of becoming someone worthy of my trust again. He'd proven through consistent action over many months that he was capable of putting our daughter's well-being above his own comfort or his family's expectations. But I also knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and reconciliation would need to happen on my terms. I built a life for myself and Clara that was fulfilling and secure, and any future relationship would need to enhance that rather than diminish it. 6 months later, we began couples counseling together, working with a therapist who specialized in rebuilding trust after major betrayals. The process was difficult and sometimes painful, but it was also healing in ways I hadn't expected. We learned to communicate more effectively, to set boundaries with family members, and to prioritize our nuclear family above all other relationships. It took another full year before I felt ready to move back to the same city as Logan, and even then, we maintained separate residences initially. We dated each other again, starting from scratch and building a new relationship based on mutual respect and shared values. This time, I never doubted that he would defend me and Clara against anyone who tried to diminish us. The real victory came 2 years after that devastating baby shower, when we decided to renew our wedding vows in a small ceremony surrounded only by people who had consistently supported our family. Clara, now a toddler, served as our flower girl, and the entire celebration was focused on our commitment to each other and to raising her in an environment where she would never question her worth. In my vows, I spoke about the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who celebrate rather than tolerate us. I talked about the strength I discovered in myself during our separation and my determination to model self-respect for our daughter. I also acknowledged the hard work Logan had done to become the partner and father we deserved. In his vows, Logan spoke directly to Clara as well as to me. He promised to spend his life proving that she was wanted, valued, and capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. He vowed to challenge anyone who tried to limit her potential based on her gender and to be the kind of father who lifted her up rather than tearing her down. Looking back now, I realize that the cruel comment at my baby shower, as devastating as it was in the moment, ultimately led to the most positive transformation of my life. It forced me to recognize my own worth and to demand better treatment from the people around me. It also gave Logan the wake-up call he needed to examine his own values and make fundamental changes in how he approached relationships. Most importantly, it ensured that Clara would grow up in a family that truly celebrated her existence. She would never have to wonder whether she was wanted or valued, because every adult in her life had proven their commitment to her well-being through their actions, not just their words. The relatives who had participated in mocking my pregnancy were no longer part of our lives, having chosen their prejudices over their relationships with us. Claire, in particular, had doubled down on her behavior and had been permanently excluded from all family gatherings. I occasionally heard through mutual connections that she was bitter about missing out on Clara's milestones, but she had made her choice and would have to live with the consequences. As I write this, Clara is now 4 years old, brilliant, confident, and absolutely secure in the knowledge that she is loved and valued exactly as she is. She's curious about everything, fearless in her exploration of the world, and has never been told that her dreams are too big or inappropriate for a girl. She's also developed a close relationship with her father, who has become her biggest champion and strongest advocate. The journey from that horrible baby shower to where we are now hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every difficult moment. I've learned that sometimes the most hurtful experiences can become catalysts for the most positive changes, as long as we're willing to demand better for ourselves and for the people we love. What I didn't expect was how the ripple effects of my decision would continue to unfold years later, creating consequences that reached far beyond my immediate family. The story doesn't end with our reconciliation and renewed vows. In many ways, that was just the beginning of a much larger transformation that would ultimately validate every difficult choice I'd made. 3 years after our vow renewal, when Clara was 5 years old, an unexpected opportunity arose that would test everything we'd built together. Persephone, who had become like a sister to me during my darkest period, was offered a major promotion that would require her to relocate across the country. She approached me with a business proposition that would change the trajectory of my entire career. "Sheila, I've been thinking about this for months," she said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "You have incredible instincts for marketing and client relations, and I've watched you build something amazing here. What if we started our own consulting firm? I have the connections and startup capital, and you have the talent and drive. We could build something that puts families first while still achieving professional success." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd grown comfortable in my current position, but I'd also felt increasingly constrained by corporate policies that didn't always align with my values. The thought of building something from the ground up, where I could create the kind of workplace culture I wanted Clara to see as normal, was incredibly appealing. Logan was initially hesitant about the financial risk involved in leaving my stable job, but when I explained my vision for the company, he became one of my biggest advocates. "You've already proven you can succeed at anything you set your mind to," he said. "If this is what you want to do, I'll support you completely." Besides, he added with a smile, Clara should see her mother taking bold risks and building something meaningful. The decision to start our own business coincided with another significant development in our family's story. Bella, who had worked so hard to repair her relationship with us, began experiencing health problems that would require ongoing care. Rather than allowing this to become a source of stress, Logan and I saw it as an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of family values we wanted to instill in Clara. We moved Bella into a beautiful apartment in our neighborhood, close enough that we could help with her care but far enough that everyone maintained their independence. Clara adored spending time with her grandmother, who had become one of her most enthusiastic supporters and advocates. Watching them together, I was struck by how different their relationship was from the one I'd feared Clara might have with Logan's family. Bella had truly transformed from the woman who had sat silently during my humiliation at the baby shower. She now spoke frequently about the importance of raising strong, confident girls and had even begun volunteering with local organizations that supported young women's education. She often told people that watching Clara's confidence and fearlessness had opened her eyes to all the potential that gets wasted when girls are taught to minimize themselves. Meanwhile, our new business was growing faster than either Persephone or I had anticipated. We'd started with a handful of small clients, but word of mouth spread quickly about our innovative approaches to marketing that emphasized authenticity and genuine connection over traditional tactics. Within 2 years, we were working with major corporations and had expanded our team to include 8 full-time employees. What made our success even more satisfying was the company culture we'd created. We offered flexible working arrangements for parents, comprehensive family leave policies, and a commitment to promoting women into leadership positions. Several of our employees had commented that they'd never worked anywhere that so consistently demonstrated that professional success and family priorities could coexist. The business success also gave me a platform to speak about issues that matter to me. I began accepting invitations to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship, work-life balance, and creating inclusive workplace cultures. Often, I would share the story of how a moment of profound personal crisis had led me to discover my own strength and build something meaningful. During one particularly memorable speaking engagement at a women's leadership conference, I was approached afterward by a young woman named Theodora who looked to be in her early 20s. She was visibly emotional as she waited for her turn to speak with me. "Ms. Sheila, I wanted to thank you for sharing your story," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm 6 months pregnant, and my boyfriend's family has been making comments about how disappointed they are that we're having a girl. Your talk gave me the courage to realize that I don't have to accept that treatment, and neither does my daughter." The conversation that followed was one of the most meaningful I'd ever had. Theodora shared details about her situation that were eerily similar to what I'd experienced, and I was able to offer her practical advice about building a support system and prioritizing her child's emotional well-being. I also connected her with resources in her area and invited her to stay in touch as her situation developed. That encounter made me realize that my story had the potential to help other women who might be facing similar challenges. I began writing a blog about my experiences, focusing on the practical aspects of rebuilding your life after a major betrayal and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate rather than merely tolerate you. The blog gained traction quickly, attracting readers from all over the world who share their own stories of standing up to family members who had tried to diminish them or their children. The comment sections became supportive communities where women shared advice, resources, and encouragement with each other. One of the most surprising developments was hearing from other family members who had witnessed situations similar to my baby shower experience. I received emails from people who expressed regret about their own silence in the face of inappropriate behavior, and many of them had been inspired to speak up when they encountered similar situations. Even more gratifying were the messages from fathers who had read my story and recognized their own past behavior in Logan's initial response to his family's cruelty. Several men wrote to share how my story had motivated them to examine their own biases about gender and to become more active advocates for their daughters and wives. The most unexpected message came from a woman named Delphine, who identified herself as someone who had been at my baby shower. She wrote a long, heartfelt email explaining that she had been horrified by Claire's comment and the family's response, but had been too shocked and intimidated to speak up in the moment. "I've regretted my silence every day since then," she wrote. Your courage in leaving that night and building a better life for yourself and your daughter has inspired me to be braver in my own life. I've started speaking up when I witness inappropriate behavior, and I've had difficult conversations with family members about their own prejudices. I know it's too late to undo my failure that night, but I wanted you to know that your example has made me a better person. The email moved me to tears, not just because of the apology, but because it demonstrated how the effects of standing up for yourself can inspire others to do the same. I realized that my decision to leave that night hadn't just protected Clara and me, it had potentially influenced how many other people would handle similar situations in the future. Delphine's message also prompted me to reach out to her directly, and we ended up having a long phone conversation that provided closure I hadn't realized I needed. She shared details about the aftermath of my departure that I'd never heard before, painting a picture of the chaos and confusion that had followed my disappearance. "The moment you left, the energy in the room completely changed," she explained. People started looking around at each other like they were seeing the situation clearly for the first time. Some of the older relatives tried to minimize what had happened, saying you were being overly sensitive, but several of the younger family members started asking pointed questions about why everyone had thought it was okay to mock a pregnant woman and her unborn child. She went on to describe how the party had essentially disintegrated after my departure, with many guests leaving early and uncomfortable conversations happening in small groups throughout the evening. Apparently, Logan had initially tried to continue the celebration, insisting that I would get over it and return home later that night. When that didn't happen, panic had set in among family members who began to realize the severity of the situation. "Your sister Ophelia was the first one to really confront what had happened," Delphine continued. "She stood up in the middle of the remaining group and said that she was ashamed of her silence and that you had every right to leave. She told Logan that if he couldn't understand why you'd been hurt, then he didn't deserve to be a husband or father." This information about Ophelia's eventual defense of me was both validating and complicated. While I appreciated that she had finally found her voice, it still stung that she hadn't been able to speak up in the moment when I needed her support most. However, knowing that she had ultimately stood up for me helped explain why our relationship had been able to heal more completely than some others. Delphine also shared information about the various family members who had tried to contact me during those early weeks, describing their different approaches and motivations. Some had been genuinely concerned about my well-being and wanted to apologize, while others had been more focused on getting me to return so that family harmony could be restored without anyone having to examine their behavior. "The most telling moment," she said, "was when Claire suggested that someone should call your workplace to have you declared mentally unstable due to pregnancy complications. Several people immediately shut that down, but the fact that she even suggested it showed how little she understood about taking responsibility for her actions." Learning about this attempted manipulation made me grateful all over again for my decision to leave and establish my independence. The idea that Claire would have tried to sabotage my professional reputation to force me back into a situation where I could be controlled was deeply disturbing, but it also confirmed that I had been right to trust my instincts about the toxicity of that environment. The conversation with Delphine led to an unexpected friendship that enriched both of our lives. She had been dealing with her own family dynamics that involved subtle forms of discrimination and control, and our discussions helped her develop strategies for setting boundaries and demanding better treatment. In return, her perspective on the broader family dynamics helped me understand some of the systemic issues that had contributed to the toxic environment at the baby shower. This new friendship also provided Clara with another positive female role model who reinforced the messages we'd been teaching her about self-worth and standing up for herself. Delphine became like an honorary aunt, someone who had witnessed firsthand the importance of speaking up against inappropriate behavior and could share those lessons with the next generation. Around the same time that I was reconnecting with Delphine, an unexpected opportunity arose that would allow me to turn my experiences into something even more meaningful. A publisher had reached out after reading my blog, expressing interest in having me write a book about my journey from that devastating baby shower to building a successful business and foundation. The prospect of writing a book was both exciting and daunting. While I'd become comfortable sharing my story in speeches and blog posts, the idea of creating a comprehensive narrative that could reach thousands of readers felt like a huge responsibility. I wanted to make sure that the book would be helpful to women in similar situations while also being honest about the complexity and difficulty of the choices I'd made. Working on the book became a therapeutic process that allowed me to examine my experiences from new angles and identify patterns that I hadn't previously recognized. I realized that the baby shower incident, while traumatic, had actually been the culmination of years of smaller incidents where my worth had been questioned or diminished. Writing about these patterns helped me understand how I'd gradually been conditioned to accept treatment that I never should have tolerated. The book also gave me an opportunity to explore the broader cultural factors that contribute to the devaluation of women and girls. I researched historical and contemporary examples of gender-based discrimination, interviewing experts and other women who had faced similar challenges. This research reinforced my belief that my personal experience was part of a much larger pattern that needed to be addressed systematically. One of the most powerful sections of the book focused on the importance of building support networks and surrounding yourself with people who celebrate rather than merely tolerate you. I interviewed dozens of women who had successfully transformed their lives after experiencing betrayal or discrimination, and the common thread in all their stories was the presence of at least one person who had believed in their worth and potential. This research led me to establish a mentoring component within our foundation, pairing women who were just beginning their journey toward independence with others who had successfully navigated similar challenges. The mentoring program became one of our most successful initiatives, creating lasting relationships that benefited both mentors and mentees. The book's publication generated significant media attention, leading to interviews on television shows, podcasts, and radio programs. Each interview provided an opportunity to reach new audiences with messages about self-worth, family dynamics, and the importance of protecting children from toxic environments. One particularly memorable interview was with a popular morning show host named Serenity, who had read an advance copy of the book and connected deeply with my story. During our conversation, she revealed that she had experienced something similar during her own pregnancy, when family members had expressed disappointment about her decision to continue working after having children. "Your book made me realize that I never fully processed how those comments affected me," she said during the interview. "I internalized a lot of guilt about my choices that I carried for years. Reading about your journey helped me understand that the problem wasn't with my decisions, it was with family members who thought they had the right to judge and diminish me." The interview sparked a broader conversation among the show's viewers, with hundreds of people calling in and writing emails to share their own experiences of family-based discrimination. The response was so overwhelming that the show decided to dedicate an entire week to discussions about toxic family dynamics and strategies for protecting yourself and your children from harmful influences. This media attention also led to speaking opportunities at universities, where I could address young women who were just beginning to navigate adult relationships and career decisions. These audiences were particularly receptive to messages about recognizing red flags in relationships and understanding that family love shouldn't come with conditions that require you to minimize yourself. During one university presentation, a student named Minerva asked a question that stayed with me long after the event ended: "How do you know when you're strong enough to stand up to family members who have been controlling your life since childhood?" My response focused on the idea that strength isn't something you either have or don't have, it's something you build gradually through small acts of self-advocacy and boundary setting. I encouraged her to start with low-stakes situations where she could practice asserting herself, gradually building the confidence and skills needed for more significant confrontations. After the presentation, Minerva approached me privately to share more details about her situation. She was dealing with parents who wanted to control everything from her college major to her career choices, constantly undermining her confidence and making her feel incapable of making good decisions independently. I connected Minerva with our foundation's mentoring program and continued to check in with her progress over the following months. Watching her gradually develop the confidence to make her own choices and set boundaries with her parents reinforced my belief in the importance of early intervention and support for young women facing these challenges. Around this time, we received news that would provide the final piece of vindication for the choices I'd made. Claire, who had remained defiant and bitter about being excluded from our lives, was facing consequences for her behavior that extended far beyond our family circle. Through mutual acquaintances, we learned that Claire's pattern of making cruel, discriminatory comments had finally caught up with her in her professional life. She worked in human resources for a large corporation, and several colleagues had filed complaints about her inappropriate comments regarding gender roles and family planning. An investigation had revealed a pattern of behavior that violated company policies about creating inclusive workplace environments. The situation had escalated when Claire made disparaging comments about a colleague's decision to have a third child, suggesting that some people didn't know when to stop wasting resources on children who wouldn't contribute meaningfully to society. The colleague had recorded the conversation and filed a formal complaint that triggered a comprehensive review of Claire's conduct. During the investigation, other employees came forward with their own experiences of Claire's inappropriate behavior. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of someone who consistently made others feel uncomfortable and unwelcome based on their family choices, gender, or other personal characteristics. The company ultimately terminated Claire's employment and made it clear that her behavior had created liability issues that could have resulted in discrimination lawsuits. The termination was handled in a way that made it difficult for her to find similar employment elsewhere, as her professional reputation had been severely damaged. When I first heard about Claire's professional downfall, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt satisfied that her cruel behavior had finally resulted in meaningful consequences. But I also felt a genuine sadness that she had never learned to change her ways and had instead continued down a path that ultimately led to her own destruction. Logan's reaction was more straightforward. She had years to recognize that her behavior was wrong and make changes, he said when we discussed the situation. Instead, she doubled down and continued treating people badly. I'm sorry she's facing difficulties, but she created this situation herself through her choices. What struck me most about the entire situation was how different it might have been if Claire had chosen to use my departure as an opportunity for self-reflection and growth. Several other family members had done exactly that, examining their own behavior and making genuine changes that allowed them to rebuild relationships with us. Claire had chosen defiance instead of growth, and she was now facing the natural consequences of that choice. The contrast between Claire's trajectory and Bella's transformation was particularly stark. While Claire had lost her job and damaged her reputation through her continued prejudice, Bella had gained a loving relationship with her granddaughter and found new purpose in advocating for young women's empowerment. The difference in their outcomes illustrated the power of choosing growth over stubbornness when faced with the opportunity to change. As Clara grew older and began asking questions about why certain family members weren't part of our lives, I found myself grateful for the clear examples I could point to of how people's choices determined their relationships with us. I could explain that some people had made mistakes, learned from them, and worked to become better, and those people were welcomed back into our family. Others had chosen to defend their harmful behavior rather than change it, and they had excluded themselves from our lives through their choices. These conversations with Clara became opportunities to teach her about the importance of both accountability and forgiveness. She learned that making mistakes wasn't unforgivable, but refusing to acknowledge and correct those mistakes was. She also learned that she had the power to choose who she allowed into her life based on how they treated her and the people she loved. By the time Clara turned 7, our family had settled into a rhythm that felt both stable and dynamic. Logan had continued his own growth journey, becoming increasingly involved in mentoring programs for young fathers and speaking about the importance of challenging traditional gender roles. His transformation from the man who had joined in mocking our daughter to someone who actively advocated for girls' empowerment was complete and genuine. Our business had grown to the point where we were able to establish a foundation that provided scholarships and mentoring opportunities for young women pursuing careers in business and entrepreneurship. We particularly focused on supporting single mothers and women from families that didn't traditionally encourage female ambition. The Foundation's first major initiative was a program that provided business training and startup funding for women who wanted to escape difficult family situations by building their own financial independence. The program was inspired by my own experience of discovering that I was capable of much more than I'd ever believed possible. During the Foundation's launch event, I had the opportunity to meet many of the women we'd be supporting, and their stories reinforced my belief that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the catalysts for extraordinary transformation. Woman after woman shared experiences of family members who had tried to limit their potential or make them feel worthless, and how they'd found the strength to prove those people wrong. One participant, a woman named Ophelia who shared my sister's name, stood up during the Q&A session to address me directly. Ms. Sheila, I read your blog post about your baby shower experience, and it gave me the courage to leave my own toxic family situation. I'm now raising my 2 daughters in an environment where they'll never question their worth, and I'm building a business that will ensure they always have examples of strong, independent women to look up to. Your story literally changed the trajectory of our lives. The event was covered by several local media outlets, and the resulting publicity brought even more attention to the Foundation's work. I began receiving invitations to speak at universities, corporate events, and women's organizations about the importance of building supportive communities and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. What I found most rewarding about these speaking engagements was the conversations that happened afterward. People would share their own stories of standing up to family members, leaving toxic relationships, or finding the courage to pursue dreams that others had told them were impossible. The common thread in all these stories was that taking a stand for yourself, even when it was difficult and scary, ultimately led to a better life. The most meaningful feedback came from men who had recognized their own behavior in the stories I shared. Many of them had gone home and had difficult conversations with their wives, daughters, or other family members about ways they might have contributed to environments where women felt undervalued. Some had made significant changes in their own behavior and had become advocates for the women in their lives. One particularly memorable letter came from a man named Augustus, who wrote, "Your story made me realize that I had been silent when my mother made disparaging comments about my wife's career ambitions. I thought I was staying neutral, but I now understand that my silence was actually a form of agreement. I've since had several difficult conversations with my mother about her behavior, and I've made it clear that disrespecting my wife means losing access to our family. Thank you for helping me understand that protecting the people you love sometimes requires making uncomfortable choices. These responses reinforce my belief that sharing difficult experiences can create positive change that extends far beyond your own situation. The baby shower that had been intended to humiliate me had inadvertently become the foundation for a movement that was helping other women recognize and demand their worth. As I reflect on the journey from that devastating evening to where we are now, I'm struck by how the most painful experiences can become the source of the most meaningful growth. The woman who stood frozen in Claire's living room, absorbing insults without defending herself, bears little resemblance to the person I've become. That experience taught me that I had the power to choose who I allowed into my life and what treatment I would accept. More importantly, it taught me that protecting my daughter sometimes meant making difficult decisions that prioritized her well-being over family harmony or social expectations. The temporary discomfort of standing up to inappropriate behavior was always preferable to the long-term damage of allowing her to grow up feeling unwanted or undervalued. I've also learned that true forgiveness doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior, but rather holding people accountable for change while remaining open to the possibility of reconciliation when that change is genuine and sustained. Some relationships can be rebuilt stronger than before, while others need to be permanently ended for everyone's well-being. Most importantly, I've learned that the revenge of living well is far more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. Today, when I see Clara playing confidently with her friends, speaking up for herself when needed, and approaching the world with the assumption that she belongs wherever she chooses to be, I know that leaving that night was the right decision. She will never doubt her worth because I was willing to fight for it when she couldn't fight for herself. And sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly grateful for how everything turned out, I almost want to thank Claire for her cruel comment. After all, it was her meanness that finally gave me the clarity and courage to demand the life that both Clara and I deserved. In trying to tear us down, she inadvertently set us free to build something much better than what we'd had before. The revenge I got wasn't the dramatic, explosive kind you see in movies. It was quieter but far more satisfying, the revenge of living well, of raising a confident daughter, of building a successful business, of creating positive change in other people's lives, and of surrounding myself with people who recognize our value. Claire lost her job, her reputation, and her relationship with the family she claimed to care about, all because she refused to examine her own behavior and choose growth over cruelty. Meanwhile, I built a life that exceeded my wildest dreams, surrounded by people who celebrate rather than diminish me and my daughter. And honestly, I can't think of any better payback than that.